To everybody, we are going to see a video recorded by our president of the group, Irache Garcia, just starting this meeting. Then we'll follow the agenda. Thank you very much. Please, the video.
Good morning, and thank you for the invitation to open this seminar, which touches on a very important challenge, the value of work at the age of artificial intelligence. We already see that the AI is ever more present in our daily lives, from drones to online search engines to factories. These new technologies can bring progress, but we must make sure that they are used in a human-centric and ethical way. They must contribute to social justice and to the green transition of our economy. It is now that we are shaping the future. Last year, the European Parliament set up the Special Committee on Artificial Intelligence to propose a roadmap. Such a plan must have a progressive imprint. AI systems must be designed to respect human dignity, and there has to be human oversight. They must also respect European laws on privacy and data protection. The Union should define and safeguard digital human rights by law. There needs to be a specific category of citizens' rights to protect privacy, non-discrimination, freedoms, and safety, amongst others. This is why I welcome the upcoming proposal of the Portuguese presidency for a European Charter of Digital Rights on the Lisbon Declaration. I think it will be an important step, and I am glad that it is coming for a socialist government. What you are discussing today is a pressing issue for our political family, because we must ensure fair working and employment conditions for everyone. Social partners have a very important role to play. New technologies can increase productivity gains, but this will generate only profits for owners and shareholders. On the contrary, the AI technologies must serve society as a whole, and they must benefit the workers through better working conditions and better salaries. We should avoid inequalities. We should rather use new technologies to bridge the gap. I wish all participants and guests a fruitful discussion, and thank you to all for your active contributions.
We have an address by the representatives of FEPS, Laszlo Andor, if you don't mind to put in now.
Mr. Andor, could you please press the speak button? Thank you.
Good morning. It is really a pleasure to take the floor after Irache Garcia Perez, and I would like to thank the SND group in the European Parliament, specifically Ivan Garcia del Blanco, for taking this initiative for the webinar. From the FEPS point of view, I would like to highlight that this initiative comes in a very timely fashion. This is a very good time to discuss artificial intelligence and labor ahead of the European Commission's proposal for a legislative framework for artificial intelligence, which is expected at the end of April 2021. But I also believe that the coincidence with the social agenda and the build-up for the May Social Summit in Porto is also very relevant here. Why do I say this? I'm saying this because technology is not neutral for society. technology is absolutely important from the point of view of how social relations, employment opportunities, and especially working conditions develop in our society. Historically, what has been observed is that the implementation of new technology is always linked to the risk of rising inequality. So it's not so much the amount of work which we have to worry about, but the conditions of work and also the income distribution, which is always affected by the introduction of new technologies. This was the case, for example, at the time of the Industrial Revolution, when real wages for many workers actually declined for 2 or 3 generations before they started to recover. And with the digital revolution or the computer revolution, or the micro electronic revolution, if you want to call it this way, of which artificial intelligence is a part, we are seeing this phenomenon again, which comes with de-skilling, a polarization in the labor market, forms of precarious work in the gig economy, for example. Also, at the workplace, there is a real potential that the introduction of AI in the form of algorithmic management and surveillance actually reduces the autonomy of workers and the power of labor. So the main question is, how can we manage the digital transition in a way that it actually benefits labor as opposed to threatening it? I will not go into details because
So the transformation of the labor market is a huge challenge. It's a historical turning point. When we talk about technology and when we say that it's not impartial, we don't necessarily mean it has to be negative. The S&D group has never been Luddites. We don't want to demonize change just for the sake of it. I was talking about Keynes, and in the 1930s, he said that the world was going to face a serious illness. So automatization, informatization, quicker production processes, and what have you, will bring forth the elimination of a score of jobs. So the EU has a huge role to play to regulate this phenomenon, to prove that we can accompany this change in the labor market by creating new labor structures and work structures. I haven't had many opportunities to read or say something that we're going to discuss today with the representatives of trade unions and so on. There's something that I'm really concerned about. There seems to be a trend whereby the restructuring of the labor market is making the participation of workers a lot more difficult than it used to be. And this, in my eyes, is a much more dangerous trend, because workers are used to collective bargaining and sort of associative behavior. And it seems that we are now in a more liberal capitalist perspective. So we have started in our group to work on this. The European Parliament last autumn approved a norm on a regulation on the ethical aspects that have to do with artificial intelligence. There's the jury committee that approved with a large majority the need to throw the foundations of this regulatory framework of ethical aspects on artificial intelligence. We have to development, and then we have develop them, and then we have to ensure that they're actually implemented in the EU. And we need also to make sure that everything is stems from a human-centric focus to safeguard fundamental rights, economic and social developments that are the basis of our EU values. We've also identified a space of high risk in the working conditions and the issues that have to do with work contracts and certain work conditions and working categories that are at high risk. So we have to identify those. We have put forth a series of conditions, which I won't list because we haven't got the time here. This is not the time or place. But we hope that the European Commission will bear them in mind. And to finish with my first intervention, since labor and work is one of the sectors that is considered at highest risk with AI, we want to ensure that there is a dialogue with workers and their representatives that should be involved in all decision-making processes. They need to be integrated in a dialogue with the international workers' representatives. We need to ensure transparency, responsibility, inclusion, and involvement at national and European level of all the workers' organizations, so that workers are involved in the regulation and regulatory framework. Very often we hear talking about digital skills. What I like about this group is that we increasingly talk about digital illustration, which is a more inclusive term because it does encompass the concept of digital skills, as well as new markets, technological conditions, but also the need to have a conscience, a deep knowledge of what these phenomena entail, as how our life conditions are going to work, and how we deal with public powers, and how as citizens we can use it to decide about these technologies and these phenomena, especially when we talk about the acceleration of these technologies. They have to be more equally and equitably distributed, because it's undoubtedly a positive thing that we have these technological advances. However, the positive effects and benefits that derive from them should not be limited to a few. Any technological advance and progress should benefit all human beings. I'm going to stop here and immediately give the floor to my colleagues who are going to be moderating the panels. The first panel is about the general conditions on ethical and socially responsible issues of AI, as well as rules, skills, regional divide, industrial policy, etc. Because we see inequalities at social level, at regional level, etc. and the moderator will be my colleague Mia Pietra Kumpula-Natri. The second panel will look to the implementation of the digital workplace to guarantee the autonomy of workers, the problems with algorithmic management and surveillance. And the moderator of that panel would be my colleague Timo Wolke. So I'm going to stop right here, and I'm pretty sure it's going to be a very interesting day. And I invite all participants to use the application to intervene, put questions and interact one way or another, because this is going to enrich today's webinar, which we hope is only a starting point in a very important analysis of a very important subject. The floor is yours, Mia Pietra Kumpula-Natri.
On my behalf, I very much look forward this work also to help the work we S&D representatives do in the AIDA committee, and then in many legislative files we already have. And as mentioned, we also wait forward the European Charters of Digital Rights by the Portuguese presidency, the social summit, but also the communication from the Commission called Digital Decade, and of course Aai Regulation that will be given out soon. We see that artificial intelligence and digitalization in general should benefit the citizens and the society as a whole. It should improve the quality of life, create new employment opportunities, and improve EU's competitiveness. Essential part of the digital economy, AI, has the potential to foster prosperity and facilitate the transition to socially and ecologically sustainable economy. Digitalization and AI will anyway change the way our societies operate and how we work. AI can empower workers, but there are risks as well. But make the good future to happen, we can have a triangle with the three corners helping each other. First, we need to have a good connectivity and infrastructure in place in every corner in the European Union. Then we need to enable data sharing within the EU to grasp the potential of the AI, quality data for the quality AI. There, the interoperability is a buzzword, and we are already acting on that in Europe. And then we need, for the third corner, to have a basic and high level of skills to innovate new and enable our workers to drive their innovations. For the skills, it is very notable on the COVID times that it's also the tool to help the resilience society and the changing world and the chasing jobs. So investing on the human capacity and human skills is very cornerstone in the digitalization and then the use of AI. But on the other hand, it's not always true that digitalization will lead automatically to the better world. AI could complement the business productivity, capital value, working condition, and relieve workers from the tedious and dangerous tasks. Good. But it does not happen automatically, and there are numerous risks on the way. We already see examples from big companies where AI software is literally looking over the shoulders of the workers, raising questions on the health and mental health also, and safety protection, pressure on labor and fundamental rights, data protection, as workers also have private data, and fair treatment at the workplace. So we need also consider the precautionary approach with regard to the new technologies and innovations. We want innovations that improve workers' life, not to make them as slaves for the data and the machines. So throughout the technologies and systems' entire life cycles, and especially when employed at the workplace, AI has to be human-centric, transparent, safe, and secure. It must comply with the fundamental rights, and I see workers' right as a fundamental right. And all applicable laws and regulation in place, and especially we all know the GDPR. When citizens are interacting and with automated systems, they should always be possible to have the human control and final say by the human. And then also when you want to go back to the decisions made by whom, you also need to have a human interface there. So the regular checks and controls prevent erroneous AI output needs to be planned and designed in the system. So fundamental changes ahead. Digitalization can create changes and opportunities, but it might necessarily improve working conditions or create quality jobs. It can only be achieved if vulnerable groups are also properly empowered, with the legal protection is in place, and universal access to quality education is guaranteed. So when European Union is aiming to take over the development of the digitalization, we work on the pile of initiatives and subject, and S&D is also highly welcoming. This initiative will shape the online world, which is also an integral part of the everyday life of ours. The reality we live already in. But then also we are working on the social pillar and the workers' right, but are they visible in the same files, or are they two different separate pillars in EU? We will hear maybe more about that today also. The data strategy will be voted in the plenary in 3 weeks' time in the Parliament, and I was happy to be the rapporteur. So it was the strategy on data, how to make data to flourish in Europe and help us to create jobs. But I also integrated some aspects that I want to enlighten here. I can't, because ITRE committee already had the great support, and I hope the plenary will also. We do say that digitalization and data economy should create quality employment without lowering working conditions. We do say that we consider that access to code-generated data should be provided in a manner that respects fundamental rights, super level playing field in the involvement of social partners, even at the company level. Stresses that such access rights must be made technically possible and granted through the standardized interfaces. So we do not want to see that also the workers are represented when planning the digitalization and data strategies at the workplace. And we call for social partners together to explore the potential of the digitalization, data and AI to increase sustainable productivity while respecting workers' rights, improve well-being and employability of the workforce, invest upskilling, reskilling, outskilling and lifelong learning, as well as investing in digital literacy schemes. And also, we stress that employees' right to know where and how their data is collected, used, stored and shared. And we call for prevention of disproportionate and undue surveillance at work. And we see that trade unions at the national level should be more involved to provide recommendations and guidelines on the data protection and privacy in the workplace. So at least after a few weeks, again, there is a more will presented by the Parliament that we want everybody to be on the board when designing the future that is so important for us. So as this panel that I'm happy to chair now, on AI rules, skills, regional divide and industrial policy, and the whole title is about the labor. Maybe I pose a question and introduce my speakers. The question is that sometimes regulation is banning or stopping the innovations. Is the way that Asia will provide a cheap gadget and widget, and with the content and programs come only from Silicon Valley? What is role for the European Union? I hope we will have good answers. What is the way to create decent, good quality jobs in Europe and prosperity for our continent with the help of AI and these policies? So the first speaker on the panel is Lucia Cioli from the European Commission. She is the Director for AI and Digital Industry from the DG Connect. Welcome, Lucia. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mia Petra, and thank you very much for inviting me to this event, and also thank to Ivan Garcia del Blanco, with whom we have been working also for and taking into account very much his very interesting proposal also for rules on artificial intelligence. It is a very interesting seminar you're organizing today, indeed. In fact, when we think of artificial intelligence, we think of a technology, as you all said, that has a very positive impact on our economy, in our society. We have seen in COVID now, we have used AI to discover new vaccine and new drugs. We have used AI to read thermographic scans and see if people were infected with COVID. We have used AI also to predict the movement of people, in particular during the first wave of COVID. And so AI has shown us that it is a very versatile technology. It can be used in many sectors of the economy. It is because it is so versatile that it can have a very important economic and societal impact, and also a very important impact on the environment and on the respect of our Green Deal objectives. Having said that, we also know that it has some concerns. And when it comes to the world of labor, I think that we have to think of risk that may arise at two levels. On the one hand, the changing in working conditions you have already highlighted, and secondly also the fact that it may violate some of the rights we have acquired in terms of safety and in terms of fundamental rights, and this is what our policies should address. Next slide. What I will do now is to summarize the European approach we have to artificial intelligence, and then give you some indication of what we think about the impact of AI in particular in the sphere of labor. Next slide. So AI is good for our economy and society. I think we all agree to that. But, and we actually aim with our European policies, we aim for the European Union to become, to be one of the leaders in terms of the development of advanced artificial intelligence systems, and making sure that those artificial intelligence systems are actually trustworthy or human-centric. And many people ask, how can we be leaders given China and the United States? And in my view, the answer is we can become leaders making, exploiting our comparative advantage, which is to be already strong in some of the sectors of our economy. I'm thinking of manufacturing, I'm thinking of tourism, I'm thinking of agro-food, and in all these sectors, financial services, even agriculture, we can use AI and we can become leaders in the development of AI in these industrial sectors. And of course, all that is going to have an impact on the way we work. But we also want to make sure that AI is deeply rooted in our values. And by that, again, I mean that AI does not violate our fundamental rights and our safety rights. Next slide. We have proposed in February a white paper on artificial intelligence. We have published it together with a European strategy for data for all the reasons that Mia Petra has just remembered, which is that you need data and you need access to high quality data to have and to develop good and performing artificial intelligence. And in our white paper, we propose a set of measures in support of investment in artificial intelligence. We call that a European approach to excellence. And at the same time, we want artificial intelligence to be developed in the European Union, but also to be used. And for AI to be used, and there is all the benefits we know about, we need to have a trustful environment where people and businesses trust the technology and actually use it. Next slide. To support investment in artificial intelligence, we first of all work with member states, and in 2018 we published a coordinated plan with member states, which is a list of actions in support of AI. We are working with the member states, and we will be publishing an update of that coordinated plan at the end of April, together with the regulatory framework that was already mentioned. And among the actions, there are some actions you all know well: investing in research, investing in industrial research, investing in actually new activities like testing and experimentation facilities that will help European innovators to test the technology before placing it on the market, and even making available regulatory sandboxes together with those testing and experimentation facilities. To do all this, we also have new programs. We have the Digital Europe program, we have Horizon Europe, but we also have the Recovery and Resilience Fund, which we hope that member states will use also in support of artificial intelligence. And one very important chapter in that is the use of artificial intelligence in the public sector, and it is also the use of artificial intelligence to update the skills. You all talked about skills before. Skills are extremely important in the world of work. We need, on the one hand, to have enough talent to develop artificial intelligence, and on the other hand, having skills of people to understand how artificial intelligence works, even when they don't have to program it, is very useful for them to use it in their work environment. I'm thinking of doctors, I'm thinking of lawyers, I'm thinking of many, many professions that will have to make use of this technology. Next slide. As our president, Ursula von der Leyen, said already when she became president, and she promised some action, and the white paper was published in the first 100 days that she was in office. Well, recently, during the State of the Union speech, she remembered the importance of having rules in AI to respect our fundamental rights and our safety, because AI, unfortunately, can be some kind of a black box, and then it is very difficult to be transparent about it, to know how the decisions were taken, to understand how AI is actually going to work. And so we have been thinking of new rules to be introduced in this sense. Next slide. When we think of the new rules to be introduced for artificial intelligence, we think very much of focusing on high risk. Mia Petra asked at the beginning, how do we make sure that we don't stifle innovation? Well, our answer is that the rules should be proportionate, should be only addressing high risk applications, and that the applications should be checked before they're placed in the market. So all these rules will become very clear when we publish the regulatory framework at the end of April, together with the coordinated plan. But what are these high-risk areas? Certainly, some of the high-risk applications do concern the world of work. You have mentioned already the issue of surveillance, the risk of violating privacy, but also when it comes to recruitment applications, there are a lot of positive impacts, but a lot of concerns as well. And so we would like to make sure that before these technologies are put on the market, they are fit for purpose, they do not have biases, and they do not reflect biases in the way they're used, and also that, of course, they are respectful of our fundamental rights when it comes to non-discrimination, but also to privacy and control. When we look at other impacts on the kind of jobs of artificial intelligence, we see that there will be, let's say, about 4 impacts on jobs. Some jobs will disappear. That is the biggest concern people normally have with automation, and artificial intelligence may do that, because in many areas it can replace human activities. But let's not forget, it can also replace dull activities. You apply AI to a robot, and the robot can actually carry out very heavy tasks the humans may not have to carry out anymore. The robot can go into sewage, it can go to analyze and go into places where humans don't really want to go. So yes, some jobs may disappear, but this is what technology has been doing for more than 100 years. And people have adapted to that. So how do we adapt to that? Because basically AI transforms jobs and profiles, and certainly skills, and being attentive to the changing skills is one of the ways we can support that transformation. And then AI will also make some jobs maybe not change and become even more important. I'm thinking of artisans, I'm thinking of engineers, I'm thinking of educators, I'm thinking of artists, These jobs, I don't think they will be replaced, and they will actually become even more important to our economies. And finally, it will create new jobs, and it has already done so that in a big way. How many data scientists have do we have now? We would like to have more, and we would like to have more women in that data science pool. But this is just to say that this is a job that didn't exist until 10 years ago. So there are new jobs that come up, and we have to make sure that workers are equipped with the right skills to support these jobs. And let's be honest, workers with higher skills can weather this transformation much better. And we also have to make sure that inequalities don't create even bigger differences between companies. 20% of companies only in the European Union can be considered highly digitized. I hope member states will use the recovery fund also to support companies and small medium enterprises. They need to have better technology because technology will make them more resilient to things like pandemics, but also to other issues that may arise in our world. And finally, we have to make sure that inequalities are corrected across the different regions in the European Union. Nordic countries are known to be more advanced in digital, and so we will have to make sure that we have measures in place to address this fragmentation. Next slide. This is my last slide. Very quickly, what are the policy responses at hand? We certainly have to be able to manage the labor market, the societal transitions. Maybe we could use artificial intelligence to be able to predict better some of those changes. We know that data are bringing an increased convergence of technologies, for example, in the factory floor. We know that AI will give instructions to robots. There will be much more collaborations between robots and human beings on the factory floor, but not only on the factory floor, also in hospitals and in other environments. And we have to make sure that that interaction is safe. Some of these issues will be addressed by our regulatory framework upcoming in April. As I said, introducing checks before AI that is high risk in terms of fundamental rights and safety is placed in the market. And we will be also there for looking at the implications in terms of safety, including in the world of work. Social partners will be involved, and we will have targeted measures also in support of small medium enterprises. And this will come with parallel policies, flanking measures in terms of skills, in terms of stepping up investment in infrastructure, in terms of digitalization of small medium enterprises. We need skilled people in small medium enterprises. We need people who decide to invest in digital and make sure that those companies which represent most of our economy are actually able to thrive thanks to digital and thanks to the advances that are made for our economy, our society, and the Green Deal. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lucilla. And then we wait eagerly for the discussion after the four introductions. Lucilla is a good person also to talk about this industrial shift that is needed and how make the Europe sovereign so that we have a more to say how we act. So next speaker is Dragos Adaskalitei. He is a researcher officer from the Eurofound. Please, Dragos, floor is yours.
Morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me.
Perfectly nice.
Good morning, and all right. I will just wait a bit till the presentation is live. Do you hear me? I cannot see the presentation. I'm sorry.
Yes, just one moment.
Yeah, no worries. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. So good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for the invitation to contribute to this very interesting and very timely seminar. And I think my presentation will complement very well what has been said before about the impact of technological change and specifically the impact of AI on the world of work. So what I want to do in this presentation is to zoom in for a couple of minutes on the impact of technological change on working conditions. And core, let's say, conclusion, if you want me to start with that, of my presentation will be basically that focusing on the impact of technological change and digitalization on working condition is of key importance, both from a regulatory perspective as well as from an economic angle. And that is because rather than just focusing on aspects related to the quantity of jobs, which have been for a long time a key angle that researchers have taken on analyzing the impact of technology. It is equally important, if not more important, actually, to look at the quality of jobs, because what we see already is that technological change and digitalization processes, including AI, have already a detectable impact on the world of work. Next slide, please. Now, Eurofound is basically looking at the impact of digitalization through the lens of three vectors of change. Digitalization is a very broad process that can have very different impacts on the working conditions depending on the specific process that is at play and depending on the specific technology that is at play. So we operationalize the broader process of digitalization through three separate vectors of change. The first one is automation, which basically refers to the replacement of labor input by digitally enabled machine input. The second one would be digitization, which is the use of sensors and rendering devices that translate parts of the physical production processes into digital information. And the third one would be the coordination by platforms, which is basically the use of networks to coordinate economic transactions in an algorithmic way. Now, each of these technologies is associated with specific consequences for the world of work, and they generate specific challenges for the world, for employment. So, for example, if you look at robots, we know already that they can lead to polarization in the labor market, as skilled workers tend to benefit more from the impact of robotization. They can also and here, robots are usually not applied or not used in the context of in the workplace by themselves. But we can also see combinations of these technologies, for example, between robots and artificial intelligence. If we look at platforms, for example, a very much discussed aspect of digitalization these days, we can see that platforms challenge, for example, traditional concepts of employer and employee and bring specific challenges for health and safety, predictability of earnings, for the employment status, for the fragmentation of work, and so on and so forth. Next slide, please. Now, in what concerns AI, what we see is that AI is a general purpose technology that can be combined with other technologies, right? So in the context of the workplace, we usually do not see AI working by itself, but actually being combined either with robots, either with other technologies that are applied to increase productivity, sometimes to streamline organizational processes, to monitor activities in the workplace, and so on and so forth. And current applications of AI basically refer to the narrow version rather than the general version of AI, which refers to machine learning and deep learning techniques that extract information from vast quantities of data. There has been a lot of policy discussion recently about the ethical implications of AI. This relates to how data is used, for example, what are the outcomes of using AI in the workplace, what kind of processes does AI influence at the workplace level, what are the consequences for workers, and so on. But as I will argue, AI is usually combined with other technologies, and in order to understand the impact of AI, it's important to actually look at how the AI technologies interact with other technological developments at the workplace. Next slide, please. Now, what you see here is the potential predicted impacts of game-changing technologies. And by game-changing technologies, again, I refer to advanced robots, wearables, additive manufacturing, electric vehicles, and so on and so forth, on selected working conditions. And on the x-axis, you can see the magnitude of expected disruption. So how large we kind of expect the change produced by these technologies to be on specific working conditions. And on the y-axis, you can see the direction of the effect. So is this a positive development for the world of work, or is this a negative development? So what can we see here is basically that many areas of working conditions are actually impacted substantially by technological change. And if you want, the largest impacts, the largest expected impacts of AI and other technologies relate to the use of skills, right? Because what we can see is basically that we will need actually to invest in skills in order to actually be able to adjust to technological change, but also in order to basically equip workers to deal with new tasks. In terms of the expected effect, as you can see, the impact on skills is to a certain extent indeterminate, because it sits in between the kind in the middle of the y-axis, and this is because to a certain extent we don't know yet exactly whether the impact of technological change on skills will be evenly distributed across different groups of workers, or it will leave some groups behind. And this is very much in line with what has been said before, right? The kind of the impacts or the expected impacts of technology on working conditions and implicitly on skills depends very much on what we do now in terms of regulations and in terms of how we address the future impacts of technologies. However, as you can see, there are quite a broad impacts on other areas or other domains of working conditions. And you can see that, for example, in terms of working time and working intensity, we expect actually that technological change will have quite a positive impact, because, for example, jobs that are menial or jobs that are very dangerous will be kind of eliminated. On the other hand, we expect quite a sizable and negative impact in terms of autonomy, flexibility, and control at the workplace, as these technologies are implemented and workers kind of lose the capacity actually to decide over the order of their tasks, to have a saying in organizational processes, and to control actually their the type of tasks that they perform. We also expect a positive impact on earnings, and this is very much so. This is very much kind of driven by the fact that technological change will lead to increase in earnings for skilled workers, right? But the kind of the magnitude of the effect will be relatively small, and this is because of where we are now, right? This is because where the way labor markets and the way collective bargaining systems and systems of industrial relations are set at the moment. Next slide, please. Now, in the next couple of slides, I want to zoom in into two particular aspects related to technological change. And the first one is about the representation of workers and the relationship between representation and technological change. What the figure shows is the representation of platform workers by member state in 2018. And what we can see already is that indeed the platform economy has a huge impact on the labor market and creates tremendous challenges for the representation of platform workers because you know representation is made difficult by, for example, unclear employment status, a general lack of common identity, an absence of a common or a fixed workplace, or the volatility of employment, right? Overall, what we can see from the data is that the organization of platforms is very limited, right? In several countries, we can see that there are specific bodies representing platforms, which have been established to promote this new business model and establish labor standards through codes of conduct. However, the impact of these voluntary initiatives is quite limited. Yeah, so in some, predominantly in Western countries, we see that some of the trade unions have actually opened to the self-employed in various member states, for example, Germany or Denmark, and they have sometimes opened specific union affiliated branches of guilds that would include non-standard forms of work. However, the reach of these initiatives remains very, very limited. There have been quite some innovations in terms of collective bargaining agreements concluded between trade unions and platforms in recent years. However, still, these initiatives are quite limited. I'm referring, for example, to the collective bargaining agreement signed in Denmark in 2018 between a platform and and a trade union. Next slide, please.
Can you wrap up soon? We are over time, so we can have some time for discussion.
Sure. Then I will just, can you go a slide further? Yes. So another transversal concern that is very important relates to the monitoring and surveillance. So what we can see now is that technologies such as IoT and AI can improve the safety of workers, but can also increase the surveillance of the workplace. And what we can see is basically that new type of data can be collected at an increased level of granularity and scale. In the employment context, this has tremendous consequences in terms of the lack of control that workers have over how data is used and the blurring of work-life balances. Specifically related to AI, there are concerns related to privacy and surveillance, which have been already mentioned, and discriminatory practices related to scoring and profiling. Next slide, please. And this is my last slides. In terms of challenges for the world of work, what we see is that an increase in the remote work linked to the coronavirus can contribute to a wider use and broader acceptance of employee monitoring technologies. The versatility of digital technologies makes it difficult actually to monitor and sanction intrusive practices. We see now that national legislation struggle to keep pace with technological advances and often do not account for the state-of-the-art technologies. And I'm referring here specifically to AI and the use of predictive AI in terms of monitoring and guiding workplace practices. And in order to let's say, partially respond to the question posed by Mia Petra, I think it's key actually to involve social partners in the introduction and the use of monitoring of technological change at the workplace. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dragos. Next speaker is Katharina Muller. She is an expert in AI laws and is also representing an economical and social committee. Welcome, Kathleen. Floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Kumpulanatri and Mr. Garcia del Blanco. Thank you, Ivan, for inviting me to this important event. I'm indeed a member of the European Economic and Social Committee, but I'm also a former member of the high-level expert group on artificial intelligence to the European Commission, and I'm the president of Ally, an independent organization that advocates responsible AI. First of all, I want to say that I'm particularly happy with the title of this event, Valuing Labor in the Age of AI, because that is what exactly what is lacking in the broad discussions on AI. We talk about ethics, which is good. We talk about the law, which is also very good. We talk about human rights, democracy, good as well. We talk about bias, explainability, privacy, and so on. And these are all very important and topics. And I truly believe that Europe has taken a global pole position in trustworthy AI that covers all of these topics. Next slide, please.
Mrs. Muller, sorry to interrupt you. Maybe your microphone is touching your clothes.
Sorry?
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Yes, it's better. Thank you.
Thank you. So when we talk about AI and work, we tend to talk about the amount of jobs we will lose to AI. Fortunately, our previous speakers already talked about the impact of AI on the workplace. But there are quite a number of studies out there, some are new, some are older, that come with different percentages of the amount of jobs that we will lose to artificial intelligence. And they range from 9% to 100%. Some people even say that we are heading towards a jobless future. So basically, we don't know. So I think that it is important at this point to talk about how we can make sure that AI lands in the workplace in a responsible manner. Next slide, please. So what does AI mean for workers? We've already heard the previous speakers say that the introduction of AI in the workplace can cause effects to health and safety, to job security, to worker privacy, to the balance between work and employer, to employee satisfaction and autonomy, to skills, and so on. And I want to dive a bit deeper into that. I see 4 ways in which AI already affects workers. There is working with AI, working for AI, working what I call under AI, and working thanks to AI. And let me dive into those a little bit deeper. So when we talk about working with AI, everybody seems to agree that we need to strive for AI augmenting worker competencies. Human AI collaboration, if you will. AI helping us become better at our jobs, taking over dangerous, dull, and dirty work, and leaving us with a sea of time to do more interesting things. And in reality, it is not that simple. First of all, humans tend to trust automated systems. We tend to do that. You all know the American judges who relied on a recidivism risk system that turned out to be biased against minorities. And why? The algorithm did not go to law school. The judges did, and still they followed the system blindly. And we are not really sure why. Perhaps they were pressed for time or had a full docket, or the system was sold to them as perfect, or perhaps they were not allowed to deviate from the outcome. So what did we do? We called for human oversight, or a human in the loop, someone that reviews the decision of an AI system when it presents that decision. Does that solve the problem? Not always. It sometimes even enhances the problem. There are signals that humans, when they are offered an AI decision, for example, on potential fraud, dive into the file to find that fraud, even if it's not there, even if the result is a result of a bias in the data or a bias in the model. But humans tend to try to find a fraud no matter what, because the system said so. So working with AI requires a lot more than just a human in the loop. It requires knowledge about what AI can and cannot do, that it mostly predicts things and does not know anything for absolute certainty, and that it can be flawed in ways that humans will never be. And not just for the human in the loop, but also for the front office worker, for example, who has to tell the single mother of 3 that she was flagged a fraudster and that she will no longer receive benefits. That front office worker will need the capability to explain why that was. Where we talk about working for AI, we have heard of many situations that persons work for an AI system rather than for a human being. We all know the example of Uber drivers, delivery workers that never ever speak to a human being and are directed entirely by an algorithm. As you might know, there is a Dutch court case pending where Uber drivers contest their dismissal because it was done by an algorithm. And by the looks of it, the driver's lawyer is looking to the GDPR and the article in that on automated decision-making to argue his case, which is good. But I would also say that there is ample impact on labor law, for example, unfair dismissal regulations here. And when we talk about working under AI, I mean working at the hands of AI. There's been talk about that also by our previous speakers, being constantly surveilled, monitored, scored, and even appraised by AI. What we see is, for example, a surge in AI performance tools, where AI systems supposedly predict the performance of workers based on the strangest things, to be honest, on eye tracking, on keystrokes, mouse movements, copy and paste behavior, internet search behavior, number of toilet breaks, interaction with coworkers, and so on and so on. So it is questionable, to say the least, whether these predictions are even possible or accurate. But it is an obvious invasion of worker privacy, and it could lead to devaluation of worker dignity, affect the worker's mental health, because they will feel watched all the time. And what do I mean by working thanks to AI or not working thanks to AI? We see a lot of AI in human resources, and we see some problems with it. For example, Amazon's recruitment AI favored men over women because it was trained on profiles of successful Amazon employees, which happened to be men. And the system did not simply filter out women. It looked at characteristics of successful employees, such as typical wordings and phrases in CVs. And men apparently used different wordings and phrases, so the women were phased out immediately. But there are also applications that, again, supposedly predict a person's chances of being a good employee by evaluating facial features, micro-expressions, tone of voice, posture, talking speed, choice of words, and so on. And it should be noted that there is no sound scientific evidence corroborating that a person's inner emotions or mental state can be accurately read from a person's face, gait, tone of voice, talking speed, or word choice. Let alone that future behavior or even success in the workplace can be predicted by it. And we should ask ourselves if we want a society where these types of invasive technologies determine our chances of getting a job. Next slide, please. So now there is Corona, and we all want this crisis to be over. So why not throw some AI against it? No harm, no foul, right? We live in desperate times. We need desperate measures. But do we really? Should we really say anything goes? Or is it wise, even now, even under these dire circumstances, to briefly pause for reflection and ask ourselves question 0? Do we want this technology in the first place? And if we do, does it help us? Or is the cure worse than the disease? We can use AI in this crisis. In fact, I think that we should, but we should do so responsibly, because despite all good intentions, once the technology is there, it is very hard to make it go away again. Next slide, please. So what do we see around workplace AI in these times of Corona? Especially in the workplace, we see a surge in AI applications, predominantly ones that monitor workers. There's monitoring of hand washing, there's monitoring of social distancing. These applications use facial recognition, they use image recognition. There is health risk monitoring, for example, through smartwatches that detect temperature and blood oxygen levels. And now that we work from home, there is a surge in worker surveillance. And all these types of AI-driven technologies are becoming mainstream as we speak because of Corona. And unless we and you set some boundaries and clear rules to it, I fear that they are here to stay. And the last thing I want to address is the vaccine passport. there's a lot of talk about a vaccine passport. And vaccine passports have been around for ages. We in the Netherlands have a small yellow book. It's the size of a passport, and they stamp it when you get a vaccine, and you take it with you when you travel. A digital version of my yellow book has no AI in it. But I do think that we should be on guard as to what it could venture into, which is a health risk passport. At the G20 summit, China pushed for a worldwide adoption of its COVID QR system in the fight against corona. And this Chinese COVID QR system is basically a health risk prediction system that renders a green, yellow, or red QR code for each citizen on their smartphone. And the colors represent the level of corona risk the citizen poses at any moment. And this is based on health records, but also on travel history, social behavior, online behavior, etc. And under normal circumstances, the idea of color coding an entire population based on their health risk would be categorically rejected. In fact, the high-level expert group on AI in the ethics guidelines already classified these types of applications as raising critical concerns, where they said any form of citizen scoring can lead to the loss of autonomy and endanger the principle of non-discrimination. And make no mistake, this is citizen scoring. And I want to urge you in your discussions and deliberations on a potential digital vaccine passport to be on guard for this kind of function creep into a simple digital yellow book. Be on guard on what it could potentially become. Digital technology can contribute to solving grand problems, but it seldom is the solution to a certain problem. Oftentimes, far less invasive solutions are right in front of our eyes. Next slide, please. And if you want to learn more about the project about AI in times of corona, you can use this QR code, funnily enough, that will lead you to that project. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Madam Muller. That was very timely. Also, the group discussed it, what is possible, what is good, and what it can develop to. So look ahead also when looking for responses on the immediately causes that we now try to settle to. So the next speaker, the final speaker on this panel is Isabella Sherman, who is from the Confederal Secretary on the ETUC. Please, Isabel, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mia Petra, and I hope I have more than 5 minutes until the coffee break and the end of this panel for this.
You can have your 10 as promised, please.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for organizing these very timely discussions, because I must say I'm very concerned about the resistance and the reluctance to deal with this issue and to address actually the issue of the impact of innovation on people and especially on workers. And having being part of different discussions, I'm very concerned about this resistance, and I hope that this discussion today will make its way through different regulation at the European level, so that indeed the issue of workers' protection is taken on board. And just to reply to your question, what is the role of the European Union in these discussions? I think it is clear. It is to live up to the European values and rights, where people should be at the center of the European actions. So technology should be at the service of people and not the other way around. And I think here, clearly, when we speak about the workplace, we do speak about the protection and the possibility to enable workers to have a decent workplace and decent job. And this is the first point I would like to raise. It's not about innovation for the sake of innovation. I think here we are clearly seeing the intrusive and pervasive practices and technology and devices that are linked to artificial intelligence. We do also question the bias linked to algorithm, And we should also question the so-called new business model, like we have been discussing so far in terms of the platform. And I think we should not, we should realize that we have missed something here, and that we should have regulated the platforms in terms of not allowing them, for example, to circumvent existing legislation when it comes, for example, to the workplace. And I'm really concerned to hear, for example, that Deliveroo, one of these important platforms using algorithm to hire and fire, have also the possibility to change the work relationship, the work status, and to move the risks to the workers in terms of asking them to be self-employed, where we all know that indeed there is no self-employment there. It's really work under subordinations and with the use and means of AI to control and surveil those workers. So I think here we should have the courage to look into that and to see that we need clear regulations when it comes to the protections of those workers. And clearly here, regulation will trigger innovation, and will trigger such an innovation that will deliver for all, and in particular for the people that are directly concerned. My second point is that we do have to look into the job quality. I understand that a lot has been said on skill, upskilling, reskilling, and I think this is also very true, but it can't be the only way to look into the adaptation of artificial intelligence at the workplace. And I think here the issue of creating quality jobs is important, and quality jobs should be based on the existing labor law legislations, when it comes, for example, to remuneration, when it comes, for example, to the working conditions and the working environment. When it comes in particular to the need and obligations to have workers' representative and trade union at the workplace to shape and design sustainable working conditions, and in particular the introduction of artificial intelligence. Here to make clear the discussions on trade unions being able or not to represent platform workers. Those workers are not other workers or new categories of workers. They are workers and employees and should not be qualified or disqualified or requalified in categories by the platforms. I think here we have to be clear. There are workers and employees like any other, and should have access indeed to the possibility to be represented. And what we see here is that those platforms do not want to have these representations because it's a clear counterbalancing power. And we should also be clear that there is a clear trade union bashing in this so-called new business model that is not complying with European values. And this is the next point, the European values. I think the compass of the European Union and the European Commission to table legal proposals should be the European Charter of Fundamental Rights. And if we look at this charter, which is in principle addressed to the institution when elaborating legislation, but also member states when they implement this European legislation, it's about dignity at the workplace. It's about the respect of private life, and in particular, the communications. It's about the right to have the protection of personal data. It's about the obligation of information consultation when new technology are introduced at the workplace. It's about collective bargaining and collective agreement to secure the protection of workers. And it's about fair working conditions. And I think this is exactly the compass that the European Union and the European Commission should use in regulating artificial intelligence. what I would like to finish with is indeed the very clear demand the ETUC, the European Trade Union Confederation, has been putting on the table since the beginning of this commission, and in discussions from the very outset with Vice President Vestager on this issue. I think we have been clear that we need to have a better protection, not guidelines, but clearly normative European framework that secures the issue of human-centered technology, and that the technology should be at the services of people and not the other way around. The role of workers' representations, role of that social dialogue and collective bargaining is key in these discussions, and it is one of the very feature of the European social model. And I think this is also something that should be put on the table, indeed, to secure the protection of workers, but also to enable workers to enjoy artificial intelligence for their developments at the workplace. For us, it is also key that next to the issue of quality jobs, we also see the dimension of AI and digital literacy. I think this is very important, and we do also call for an inclusive governance when it comes to AI technologies, discussions, debate, and elaboration of regulation at the European level. So I think to include the European Trade Union Confederation in the discussions is very important, and also for us a key element to secure this very important dimension, which are about indeed the remunerations I mentioned, but also the dimension of workers' participation, working conditions, and also, of course, the dimension of redress and the access to justice, which is key. And here, what we also are asking is indeed the recognition of liability in terms of business and developers, and also the reversal of the burden of proof in favor of workers, indeed, because of the imbalance of power when it comes to the access to this information related to AI technology. And my last point is indeed, if we want to make the difference, and I think this is exactly where we are at the crossroads when it comes to artificial intelligence, we have to put the dignity at work at the center of those developments, and not put the workers as in situations where they are the one who are testing those artificial intelligence technology and devices at the workplace. And I'm here would like to raise the concerns about sandboxes. Regulatory sandboxes are in principle experimentations in the market of products, and those products are sometimes tested on the workers. And here the issue of tracking contacts was one of these very alarming developments, where no control, no information, no consultations, no possibility to trace who used those data, who collect them, and at the end, how long, for example, those data are collected and gathered and maintained. So I would like here to put again on the table the issue of regulation, the issue of workers' participation as one of the key elements. And here I refer to a very important study done by the European Parliament Research Services in 2020, where this element is clearly one of the avenues to secure sustainable artificial intelligence in society and at the workplace. Thank you, Mia Petra.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We are over time and the technicians need a 5-minute break for testing the comments. But I will give 4 panel speakers a 1-minute possibility to answer the raised questions by your colleague panelist. So if you please can react to something heard, maybe to your the Commission, what you heard for the wishes, some answers for the law side, responsible AI, what you heard from the colleagues in the panel, the skills, how to do, as was on the Dragos. So please, 1 minute, something you learned or get motivated from your colleagues. If we start from the same order, Lucilla, please.
Thank you. In 1 minute, I will refer to the presentation by Katharina Muller, which was very interesting. At the end, she presented the risk of the vaccine passport. And as we are, very much involved also in the work on the vaccine passport, I very much take her point of a risk to create. Although there is no AI in the vaccine passport, there is a risk that you can apply AI and you can turn the passport into a health risk prediction system like it has been done in China. And I find this this comment and this approach very, very important, and I will take it home, and I will always be wanting to remind how risky any kind of scoring by the public sector for any reason could be, and how important that is actually probably not even allowed in the European Union. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Dragos, please.
Thank you. I'll refer to the presentation of Isabella, and I think it's one of the points that she raised regarding the use of regulation in order to address the challenges of AI is very important. And I think here we actually have to really think in terms of rights and in terms of novel rights that we can create for workers rather than in terms of let's say voluntary regulations. And I think it's important to also think about how can we innovate and how can we actually address the challenges posed by AI and new regulations in terms of developing, let's say, adaptable regulatory frameworks. And there is already quite some work done on that. And I'm thinking here, for example, the right to disconnect, which is already implemented in some European countries, but also in potentially, generating new rights, such as, for example, the right to explainability, which in the context of AI technology, the application of AI technologies in the workplace will be extremely important to allow, for example, a meaningful collective bargaining at the workplace. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Katharina Muller.
Thank you. Thank you. First of all, thank you very much, Lucilla Scioli, for taking up my little warning. That is good to hear. I want to react basically to a question that you, moderator, asked at the beginning. Many people tend to think that regulation or even ethics guidelines are hindering innovation, and I would like to say that I think that is a bit of a false statement. Regulation can hinder bad innovation, irresponsible innovation, dangerous innovation, but regulation also has a good side to it. It creates a level playing field for everybody that wants to develop something and put it on the European market. And that level playing field helps companies to compete in a fair way. and not have to deal with all kinds of rogue technologies. And the second thing is that we should not forget that Europe has 500 million potential consumers. So if Asian or American companies want to bring their products to the European market and we set the boundaries for those products, they would have to live up to those boundaries and those regulations as well. Like the GDPR, we could really set a worldwide framework here. So that is my reply to the regulation versus innovation statement that we've been hearing so many times. Thanks.
Thank you. And then Isabella Sherman for the last comment.
Mrs. Sherman, could you please press the speak button? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And what I hear is that there seems to be a consensus to look into this workplace dimension as to be in need to be respected and to be taken on board in the discussions. And I seems to understand from the presentation of Celia from DG Grow that this is indeed something that seems to be on board in a way or the other, and we would very much welcome to get in touch directly and to discuss this dimension before the Commission is going to table its initiative in April, so that we indeed are able to contribute as much as we can for indeed innovations and artificial intelligence that deliver for all. And also that delivers for the workers at the workplace. It's about skills, but it's about also quality jobs, and the quality job is for us key to look into a future where the digital transition is also delivering for the workers in Europe. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm very happy about this panel. We also had a common ideas for the future. And I also wanted to react to the Twitter question that if not everywhere the trade unions are strong enough, so can we leave the individuals behind? And of course, we do have legal settings that requires human rights to be respected and also the labor laws, but also representation is best carried by the organization themselves as well. But I also want to say that so much is needed on the European level to do, because the companies are big, the innovations are global. And this is also the way that the kind of demand-based policies, we can talk, compare it to the climate targets we set and climate regulations. So also for the data innovations, when there is a demand for the good data innovation, AI innovation, digital innovation, there is a biggest economical region in the world so far, European Union, with the common legislative powers to guide the way for the future. And this gave a lot of thoughts for the future work. Thank you all panelists for the first session. And now you have time to grab off your coffee and leave your screens for a moment. There will be some technical check-ins, and we will continue exactly in 4 minutes' time.
accessibility to the labor market, including for people with disabilities. AI could complement the productivity, value, and skill of human workers and relieve them from dangerous tasks. However, AI's development and deployment also raise concerns with regards to privacy and occupational health and safety. The use of AI could lead to disproportionate and illegal surveillance and monitoring of workers and infringe on their dignity and privacy, as already discussed during the first panel. Gender, racially, or ethically biased algorithms, just to name a few. Additionally, there are numerous concerns such as discriminatory treatment, including in the recruitment processes. The increasing use of algorithmic management is accelerating the digital surveillance of workers. Still, questions remain on what the risks are in terms of worker autonomy, equal treatment, and collective rights, privacy, and workers' well-being. So let's take Amazon as an example. AI and robots might help raise the business productivity. Thanks to AI and robots, Amazon managed to ship more items than ever during the last year's holiday season with about 20% fewer seasonal workers than the year before, thus further increasing its huge market share and fostering its market dominant position. At the same time, robots make the job far more repetitive, often giving Amazon workers no relief from their repetitive tasks. Consequently, such business models use the automation to put pressure on the humans to become more productive. And alongside the concerns that businesses can use AI to undermine the freedom and autonomy of people, there is also a risk of contributing to and aggravating the mental health problems of workers, such as burnout, technostress, psychological overload, and fatigue. That is why all AI solutions in the workplace must be agreed with workers' representatives. And they must be transparent, fair, and they have to avoid any negative implications for the workers. Liability with regard to the use of AI must be clearly defined, both in the event of occupational accidents and damage caused to third parties. According to the European Centre for Development of Vocational Training, 42% of workers in companies that apply AI in their business processes believe that such activities lead to ethical issues which must be addressed. As S&D, we therefore want a human-centric and human-led AI in the Union, which will be designed to respect human dignity, human agency, and human oversight. Any EU legal framework on AI, robotics, and related technologies must guarantee fundamental rights and establish clear ethical principles, legal safeguards, liability, and principles of non-discrimination, protection of privacy and personal data, transparency, safety, accessibility, and accountability. There must be no undue surveillance, no safety risk, no abusive HR practices. And these points did I mean when I said in the beginning, we need to set the right and strict rules. As you see, there are a lot of things that we need to think about and we can talk about today when it comes to AI in the workplace. And I will leave it with this, and I'm very happy to introduce and welcome our panelists. Mr. Stefan Olsen from the European Commission, working in DG Employment in the Directorate for Employment. We have the honor to welcome Mr. David Reichel, who is a project manager for social research in the Research and Data Unit at the EU Agency for Fundamental Rights. It's my pleasure to welcome Ms. Ivana Bartoletti from the Fabian Society and author of the book An Artificial Revolution on Privacy and AI. The next speaker is, and I'm happy to welcome him today, is Mr. Valerio Di Stefano, research professor at KU Leuven, working on AI technology and labor. And last but not least, it's my pleasure to introduce to you Birte Dedin, Director of the ICTS sector at Uni Europe, the European Service Workers Union. So, some technical or a few technical remarks before I give the floor to our first panelist. Just a reminder, each speaker has 10 minutes, and I was strictly advised to be very strict with the timing. So after 9 minutes, I will push the speaker button. You will see that I pop up in your on your screen, but I won't say anything. And so you know that there is 1 minute remaining. Afterwards, we will have a short Q&A and move on to the next speaker. And at the end of the panel, I will open the floor to questions from our participants, as long as we have time for that. So it's in your hands. And with this said, I'm now passing the floor to Mr. Olsen. The floor is yours for 10 minutes.
Thank you very much for that introduction. I'm very honored to be here today, this morning. I would like to first congratulate you, Chair, and the S&D group of having put together this seminar, because it's really high quality, very interesting speakers, and it's been very interesting to listen this morning, and I'm looking very much forward to this panel with a lot of distinguished speakers. Chair Timo, you have already, I think, with your very clear introduction, raised a lot of the issues, but let me just take our approach and focus on a few key issues. As we've heard, the deployment of artificial intelligence systems in the economy has increased rapidly in recent years. We've heard many examples this morning. I mean, AI is there in the driverless cars, but also our home environment. We do excellent translations on the internet, and there are so many other examples. As we've also heard, in the world of work, the use of AI first became prominent through its application by platforms, where algorithms first were used to manage and control workers. But it's spreading to all over, to traditional workplaces. The reports which were referred to and which we're all reading with a lot of interest show that in 2019 already 12% or machines were used for employee management and surveillance in 20% of EU companies. And I'm sure that figure has increased exponentially since. So, as was also referred to, a lot of discussion around AI initially was focused on how many jobs will be lost and gained. But as we've seen here today, we're moving on, and we're looking at issues about the central question regarding the quality of the jobs. So the skills issue is still there, it's essential. How do we move from the jobs lost to the jobs gained? But the issue of the quality of those jobs, which several speakers have referred to in different ways this morning, is now becoming more and more important. We see that some key experts and organizations, like we've heard from the ETUC, for example, have started focusing on how AI affects job quality. And I was particularly happy to see that Professor De Stefano is part of the panel, as he's somebody I've heard several times and who we're working closely with to explore this issue. So when we look at how AI is used in the world of work, we see that AI can be used for recruitment, filtering applications, evaluating potential workers. It can also be used to monitor work performance. We see that many, to draw this to its extreme, we could see that managers could be replaced by AI in many instances. And these algorithms, they take decisions which can affect, as for example Isabel raised, pay levels, give work instructions based on internal metrics and worker ratings. So many challenges here. And I'll just look at how this could be problematic. I mean, the use of AI could, as you said yourself, Chair, introduce or reinforce discriminatory practices. Bias can creep into algorithms, and it doesn't have to be intentional. But obviously what we all here share is that this cannot be an excuse for taking responsibility. But so we saw in 2019 the example we all know, that the world's biggest online company had to abandon its automated recruitment tool after the algorithm had begun systematically to reject female applicants for engineering roles. And so we see that there is a real issue here, and we're learning day by day. And in this regard, I'm looking forward very much also to David's intervention on the link of AI and fundamental rights, which you also raised, Chair. Another issue is the lack of transparency. We heard the term black box, and this is really a very, very serious issue. And that also affects the understanding of how AI works. What are the implications for workers from the use of AI in the workplace? We need to know, the workers need to know. AI can also reinforce power imbalances, as we see in the platform economy, leaving workers unable to challenge unfavorable decisions. And that brings about a third challenge, which is a kind of what I would call an accountability gap. AI allows the tracking, disciplining, setting expectations for workers without human supervision. And this, as you mentioned yourself, Chair, could not only undermine existing workers and fundamental rights, but also distance employers from decisions taken via algorithms, and thus obscure the attributions of obligations, which is a very serious matter. We see these challenges in platform work, and where AI is used very, very prominently. And that's why it's very important that we learn more and we look at this. And that brings me to the last part, which is what the Commission is doing. You're surely aware of that only last week we launched the first stage consultation for an initiative on platform workers, and you know the system. We consult social partners in 2 stages before we can launch a legislative proposal, and this was done last week, and I think you will have seen, I mean, in the analytical document that was issued here, we have identified all of these challenges that it's very good to hear back that I think that what we've heard today so far is that we got this analysis right. Then we have the upcoming AI regulation. My colleague Lucia spoke about it, so I will not go into this. She was very clear. So that will be a very important starting point for our AI regulation. So my conclusion, so that I don't get you to pop up on my screen, Chair. AI technology is evolving fast, and its capabilities are growing as we speak. We as policymakers should be ready to react and address these newly emerging or unaddressed challenging. I think you will see as you've heard from my colleague Lucia, and as you see in our platform consultation, but also overall in the intentions of my Commissioner Schmidt, and the college, that we are ready to address these challenges, and we are very much listening to you in this process. Thank you very much, Timo.
Stefan, thank you very much. It wasn't meant as a threat that I pop up, but only as an advice. So you managed to only use 9 minutes. That's great. It's a good start. Thank you very much for your very important words, which have been very clear for me. But I would invite our panelists so that we at least have some kind of discussion, even in this digital setting. I would like to ask the other panelists if they would like to take the floor to directly reply to your intervention. Of course, we will have time in the end, and at the end, we will also include questions from the viewers who are not connected to the interactive system. Who would like to react and intervene? If you would like to intervene, just raise your hand so that you can be allocated the floor.
Mrs. De Stefano asked for the floor.
Hello. Thanks so much for this presentation, Stefan, and it's great to see you here, and congratulations on issuing the last call for social dialogue on platform work. I think one of the things that we should be sure of is that we don't confine this idea of AI at the workplace in the sector of platforms. Of course, in platform, this is particularly prominent, but it goes much beyond that. And I was wondering if there is any idea from the Commission to also intervene to spread the attention to AI at work beyond the question of platforms.
Would you like me to reply, Timo, or?
Yes, sorry, I didn't see the panel with the raised hand indications, but now I can see it, and now I can some kind of moderate. But yes, please, Stefan, it would be great if you directly reply to that.
No, thanks a lot. No, I think every day we struggle with the different systems. So yes, indeed. Thank you very much for that question. As we heard from Lucilla before, we are taking a broad initiative, which should come in April. Then we are doing this specific consultation on platforms, but that is not at all that should not be interpreted as an intention from the Commission to limit any AI workplace related regulation or initiative to platform workers. I think the issue is here that we have a specific mandate to address platform workers, and then we want to be sure that AI is part of that process. We will also hear, of course, what the social partners tell us in this consultation. But of course, we're taking this step by step, but I think it's very important that we signal, and as I explained in the intervention, we see how this is not at all limited to platform work, but it's an issue over all workplaces, and therefore I'm sure we will address this in a broad frame. So no intention to limit this, but it's also a matter of taking this step by step for the moment.
Thank you very much for this very precise answer. So we would have 2 minutes left for the discussion, but I can't see that any of the panelists raised his or her hand at the moment. I will just wait a few more seconds. So the raise hand button should be directly under the picture next to the speak button. Okay, so no questions at this moment, but in the end we will have, as I said, additional time to discuss. So first of all, thank you very much, Stefan, for the answers and your remarks. And I would now like to pass the floor to Mr. Reichel, also for 10 minutes. And again, if I pop up shortly, this means there's 1 minute left. Yeah, the floor is yours. Looking forward to your intervention.
Very much, Chair, and thank you very much for the invitation to this very interesting workshop. I didn't feel like asking the floor because I know I was right now giving the floor, but I will for sure embed a few questions in a way also in my presentation. So I'll speak about artificial intelligence and fundamental rights based on the findings of a report that the Fundamental Rights Agency published in December last year. Trying to find some evidence to contribute to the important ongoing policy discussions. And I will read the results in the presentation in line of the potential use of AI at the workplace. Next slide, please. In general, the approach of the Fundamental Rights Agency is that, of course, we need evidence for policy making. And as also Stefan Olsen just mentioned before, we are learning on a day-by-day basis. And I think it's particularly challenging in this area where the technology is moving quite fast and it's difficult to keep up with research and evidence, but still need to engage into policy making. So our report is part of a larger project where FRA looks into fundamental rights implications of AI across different areas. And this way trying to contribute with some evidence base to the policy making and really also raising attention to the fundamental rights, which were mentioned by several of the previous speakers, but then also highlight potentially that policy making needs to be followed up by practical application to give people guidance on how this can be applied. Next slide, please. So very briefly, most of you are aware, but there's no accepted definition of AI, and that's just in our study, we interviewed around 100 people working for businesses and also public administration using or planning to use some sort of AI in different areas. And of those, I mean, people had really different views what AI is. I mean, we have the general definition, for example, the one from the high-level expert group on AI, but it's important to keep in mind that there's no accepted definition and people might understand different things under the term AI. Next slide, please. And this lack of understanding or different understanding of AI makes it even more important to discuss AI based on concrete use cases and examples. And in our study, we looked into different areas, including marketing, targeted advertising, for example, law enforcement, health services, image recognition, for example, and social welfare, where it's much related to the provision of social benefits and the use of algorithms. And we also had several other examples included in our research, also, for example, to advise job seekers based on algorithms how to best find jobs. In general, the technology discussed under the heading of AI is quite different in terms of the levels of automation involved, the complexity of the technology, from the rather simple up to really highly complex algorithms, the impact that technology has on individuals, like the harm that could happen if something goes wrong, and the impact on society depending on the scale of use of different technologies. Next slide, please. What was interesting when we talked to people and asking them, like, why are they using AI? What's the purpose of planning to use the technology? And it was really throughout almost all the interviews, people said it's for efficiency reasons. Here is two quotes from our interviews where people said it's mostly used to save time if we have to go through a lot of material, or also to say we need to make better use of our workforce and to handle our cases as effectively as possible. And I mean, this speaks very much to the use of AI at the workforce. Efficiency is, of course, important, but we all know that efficiency alone is not a reason enough to interfere with any fundamental rights. Next slide, please. So that's the horizontal analysis we did across these different use cases. We highlighted 3 rights areas, including data protection, non-discrimination, and access to an effective remedy and fair trial. But it is important to mention that given the different ways that AI can be used, that virtually all fundamental rights may be impacted on in positive, but of course also in a negative way. And speaking on AI in the workforce, it was mentioned before, the right to collective bargaining and action is relevant when thinking about the gig economy. But then, of course, also Article 31 of the Charter, the right to fair and just working conditions, which is in respect to health and safety at the workplace, but also dignity relevant here. Let me elaborate on the 3 horizontal areas. Next slide, please. Data protection, of course, we have the GDPR as a very strong legal basis, and there's a high awareness of those using AI that data protection is an important area. However, it's not always entirely clear if people use personal data for the development, or at least people are not entirely clear about what kind of data they are using for the algorithms. But for sure, the majority of use cases makes use of personal data, which also means that data protection law kicks in. And in data protection law, the question of automated decision making and human review is one of the important aspects to be considered. But what we also see is among those using AI that it's not always clear what automated decision making means, and also human review is not always clear, like that people how they override certain decisions or look into decisions made by an algorithm. Next slide, please. Very important, also highlighted in the white paper by the Commission, equality and non-discrimination. It's quite well known also among those planning to use AI that AI theoretically and potentially can discriminate. However, what we see among those trying to deploy AI is that there's a lack of in-depth analysis of non-discrimination. Most people assume that their system is fine. They don't directly throw, for example, gender or age data into the system, so it will not discriminate, which obviously is not true because there's a lot of information that can link to these protected characteristics. What is also important, the rights of special groups are quite absent in discussions. And here I think about the right of integration of persons with disabilities or also older persons, which is relevant and needs to be taken more seriously in the discussions. Next slide, please. And finally, access to an effective remedy, access to justice in general is really important when AI is used. And this starts by the fact that people need to be aware that AI was used in decisions about them, because only then they can complain. In our research, we haven't found many examples of complaints received, which could be partly because the technologies are relatively new, but also because people might not be aware that somewhere AI is used to support decisions. And this links to what we heard also before, the importance of transparency and explainability, because only when the users of AI are transparent and are able to explain their decisions, then it can be meaningfully challenged also in court. Next slide, please. So AI horizontally across these rights areas should, of course, process data legally, not lead to unfair treatment, and for access to justice, it should be contestable. And this includes the 3 dimensions that people need to be aware, need to know where and how to complain, and also make sure that decisions can be explained. Next slide, please. That's so far for the horizontal analysis and results. I just want to put in context of this panel of results. Fra also did a study on facial recognition technology. Our paper focused on the area of law enforcement, which of course has some different implications than the use of facial recognition technology, for example, at the workplace. However, we cite there a survey, and I remember that this survey also asked about the use of face recognition technology at the workplace, so for human resource purposes. And you can really see, yes, I see I have 1 minute left. I will manage. You see the acceptance, if face recognition technology should be permitted, varies across the different areas. 70%, for example, would agree in the UK, based on this survey, that it can be used in police and criminal investigation. And this lowers across the different areas of use. And if we look at the bottom of the slide, only 4% interviewed in the UK would say should be permitted to monitor personality traits or mood of candidates when hiring for a job. 33% to ensure workers do not enter unauthorized high-risk areas. And the main point here is that there's always a share in the population that objects to be subjected to the facial recognition technology, for example. Next slide, please. And this is also reflected in this survey, where 76% tend to feel uncomfortable if the technology would be used in the workplace or for job interviewing. And the reasons people give why they would feel uncomfortable is that they do not trust that the technology would be used ethically. It might discriminate. Also, more than half of the people feeling uncomfortable say it's unfair, it's unreliable. And the last point, I think this is really important, also in view of dignity, is that people might not be able to opt out or consent. Last slide, please. So to conclude, from our research, the full scope of fundamental rights needs to be taken into account. This should be done with prior impact assessments that cover the full spectrum. Impact assessments are relevant because fundamental rights take place in context, which means that use cases have different purposes and impacts. And effective oversight and overall accountability is also crucial, where we need to consider the role of different existing bodies that are here to protect fundamental rights. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, David. And we now have roughly 2 minutes for a short discussion directly after your intervention. But as I said, we will have time at the end. I have a question. I will spare it for the end as Birte Dellen raised her hand. So I would like to pass the floor directly to you.
Yes, thanks a lot. And I would just, I don't actually have a big question. I just would like to very much thank Mr. Reichel for raising these issues, because they're absolutely in line with our concerns about the issue, especially regarding surveillance of workers. And I'm very happy you mentioned the lack of transparency, because that is exactly what we are seeing. And I would like to know also regarding the prior impact assessment, which is also something we are totally agreeing to, and the question of a right-based approach to legislation, which is again something we also promote. Could you, because you were cut short in your presentation, I wonder, provide some guidance to what would be the application of that, the implementation, because the concepts are there, but how would you want to roll that out? And what would be then the possibility of social partners to be involved in those impact assessments? Thanks.
Yes, thank you very much for of course the positive feedback and raising similar concerns. Yeah, impact assessments is the general tool that you could do because of the different contexts for fundamental rights implications. And I mean, what is relevant when it's from AI-based systems, which are often based on machine learning, is a starting point is just describing the system, meaning like what is the purpose of the system, what data were used to train the system, the training data, because that could be an important source for errors or for bias. what tests were done, what's the level of accuracy, like is the level of accuracy similar or different across different groups in the population, and so forth. And I think what is relevant here is, we have in our report also a more detailed description, which I'm encourage you also to have a look at, is to not accept saying it's a black box, we don't understand what it is, because there's in fact nothing that prevents people to describe what they did, to say that's the purpose of our system, this is the technology we used and it was trained based on this and that data. And so I think that's really the best starting point, to really be transparent on what was done and how it was tested. I mean, we see that most of the users in tests only looked into technical aspects, but just did not think about different fundamental rights from the outset. And often there might not be a problem at all, but just thinking about them might also help people to fix some things from the outset. And so this is why the impact assessments are useful in advance.
Thank you very much for your precise intervention. And I would like, just as a short personal remark, to underline one of your assumptions, that efficiency is not a sufficient reason to limit fundamental rights. So I think this should be the headline of every discussion in this context. So thank you very much. And I would now like to move to our next speaker, Ms. Bartoletti. And the floor is yours for 10 minutes. And I'm looking forward to your presentation.
Mrs. Bartoletti, could you please press the speak button? Thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Brilliant, thank you. So first of all, I just wanted to say thank you so much for having me here and for organising such a timely discussion with such an array of amazing speakers here. So I would like to structure this 10 minutes that I have on two separate parts. The first one is looking at a little bit of a background that I think is absolutely crucial, which is in relation to the reality of work, and that has been happening especially in the post-COVID times. That are post-COVID times, they are building on the trends of surveillance, of datafication, on formalization of social issues, which have been underpinning technological development so far, and what that means in relation to the workplace. And the second part, I like to focus on algorithmic management in work, performance, and all that, and how we move forward. And I would like to offer a number of considerations and possible recommendations and practical actions that could be taken. And I speak as someone who, day in, day out, in my professional capacity, I work with companies and organizations to embed a privacy, security, and ethics by design approach in algorithmic systems. And at the same time, I am also a commentator and run an organization which is called Women Leading in AI, where we advocate for fair, responsible, and ethical use of artificial intelligence. So I bring two perspectives to this, I believe. The first point that I wanted to make is that I think it's really important, especially in this setting, to really understand that times have changed. And I think it's now very clear to the majority of European citizens, it's very much clear that there's nothing neutral about technology, and especially when it comes to work. And people are waking up, in my view, after what's been happening, for example, with the Dutch case around fraud, with the Deliveroo case in Bologna, and with things like the A-level scandal in the UK, have been really, they're waking up to the politics and even the geopolitics around data and data classification. And I think the focus of the discussions is often, when we talk about AI, is often been around the issues around algorithmic fairness, is always often been around explainability, which are all topical issues, and I will come to that. But I think there is one issue that comes before all that, in particular when it comes to surveillance and worker surveillance that we're seeing very much in the COVID times. And this is, if we make surveillance systems even more seamless, even more impartial, does that mean, and what does it mean for a society, for the European Union in this case, to make a submission to such monitoring a model for employment? And I think this is a fundamental question that is really important to ask. And the reason why I say this is because every AI product that gets produced, which can be deployed in this context, has affordances that can really reshape working life. So I think we need to step back, and especially talking to the SD group, it's really important to really step back and look at what that means, not just in terms of the technicality of a product, but also in relation to what is the society that we're heading to, what is the workplace that we're heading to, where we make such a strong submission to, for example, surveillance of workers in this space. Now, the second element that I really want to focus on, and the second is what is happening in work. We've been hearing about algorithmic management. We've seen workplaces where it's really happening within work, the formalization and mathemization of any employment issues, really. And that could be in relation to performance, that could be in relation to hiring. We've seen a lot of this happening in a context where algorithms are increasingly having a greater decision-making function. And this is happening across all sectors. Algorithms are having an editorial function, a gateway to the things that we see. And in work, they are really taking a very greater role in performance, hiring, and surveilling, and even in health management of employees. I hear a lot mention of transparency and explainability. And I really think we should pause on this for a moment, because transparency and explainability are great, but they're two very different concepts. And I would really like the European Union to really push for explainability to be meaningful. What does that mean for an algorithm, for a decision-making system to be explainable and understandable to the user? Explainability is very much contextual. It means different things to different people. The conflict between trade secrets law and explainability is something that I think needs resolving. For example, should trade unions have access to algorithms when they make decisions around employment performance, so the trade union could actually audit them? That is a meaningful question in my view, because it goes to the heart of the conflict between the debate that we're having around fairness, openness and transparency, and the issue around trade secret law, which is recognised by the GDPR, obviously, which is recognised by European legislation. But to some extent, it can be at odds with the requirement of transparency and explainability. And again, on transparency and explainability, I'd like transparency to be around everything when it comes to artificial intelligence products. How is that product being produced? Is it relying on what is sometimes called the ghost workers in AI? The people would, we think AI jobs are glamorous and all pretty cool, but in reality, there is an underclass of workers, that is being created through the AI systems. The other issue that I wanted to mention is that at the moment, I think it's becoming relevant and more and increasing that workers are bound in data extractive relationships in work, in a context where data extractivism is very much at the basic of our relationships with the digital ecosystem, with workers unable to negotiate data rights. And obviously the GDPR has been great in this, making clear that obviously consent cannot be a base to negotiate data rights in employment context. But the recommendations that I have here is how do we achieve collective bargaining around the use of data rights, and how do we make sure that algorithmic impact assessment were mentioned earlier, how we make sure that in the context of a deployment of AI, workers are involved from the onset. One of the things amongst the over 180 data ethics principles that I've seen floating around over the last 10 years, I don't think many of them mention the working with the workforce from the onset and making deliberation around the privacy and the relevant trade-offs alongside workers from the start. The last two recommendations that I think I'd like to see in this space and like to make and to offer to this space very much relate to the future that we want to have. Because I think we've got to start from that. What is the future that we want to have in relation to AI in the workplace? I would like to see things like mandatory auditing of algorithmic systems from particular kind of AI systems which have an impact, profound impact on workers. And I think this is really important, especially when it comes to hiring, especially when it comes to performance reviews. And I do believe that it's really time to perform a sound and important fitness test of current legislation and understand how that applies meaningfully to artificial intelligence systems as we know them. The previous speakers has brilliantly outlined some limitations that, for example, data privacy law and data protection law have when it comes to AI systems. And that is because fairness, for example, in privacy means very different things to what fairness means in consumer legislation or in discrimination law. But at the same time, although I do argue there is a requirement under the GDPR to audit an algorithm for fairness, that fairness may have a different meaning in other disciplines. In discrimination law, for example, discrimination in AI systems happens in much more difficult and complex ways and they're more difficult to decipher. Algorithms can discriminate by proxy, and sometimes all of this is much more difficult to understand. So how do we make sure that the current legislation that we have in place is able to deal with the potential harms of artificial intelligence? And my last remark would be around the fact that AI is capable of huge innovation. And the issue around quality of work was mentioned in the past. I do not think artificial intelligence is a course on taking jobs. And I think the narrative that we should have around it is that artificial intelligence can augment and increase and improve the way that we work. But too often we talk about augmented intelligence only when it comes to the top jobs, only when it comes to skilled jobs. And what I would very like much to see is how we can create a narrative around artificial intelligence augmenting, improving jobs, not just for the skilled, super skilled jobs or the jobs in the law, but also for the care sector, but also for the people who really need their jobs to be made easier, and also to be offered opportunity for lifelong training. So the reason why I'm saying this is because I think, in my view, that does require a shift in the way that we approach this. And that would be my last remark and my last recommendation. Thank you.
Perfect timing, perfect and very important intervention with, I think, very important advice. So, as always, I would like to ask our panelists first if they want to directly intervene.
May I? Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for this very interesting intervention, and I found especially interesting your point on discrimination you mentioned, and you make a lot of important points on that discrimination also happens in context, and that it's actually not so easy to detect, and this is also why the impact assessment in context I see so relevant. And also the different views from data protection. My question to you would be something that is often mentioned, and that also strikes me on the efficiency discussion, that the use of AI also, of course, has positive impact. Do you see a chance also for the use of algorithms and AI to make decisions fairer, in fact, and also prevent discrimination?
This is a really, really important question. And I'm often asked about this, I'm often said, but we could use it to make it fairer. I want to make one point about this, which is, in theory, yes. The issue with fairness is that there is a big contrast, I think, when it comes to fairness. And that is that if we want, for example, to advertise for a job, and we want to promote the job, we want as many people as possible to see their job. The job pays at a certain range. And if we rely on historic data, we are very likely to serve that advert to people who earn around that kind of salary. If the job pays not too much, we are more likely to serve that advert to people who would get paid less. And normally, sadly, because of structural inequalities in our society, people who get paid less are often women. The reason why I'm saying this is because there is a conflict between efficiency and fairness. If we want a lot of people to see the ad, if we want a lot of people in a system where the more people click on an ad, the more it's efficient, then in that case there would be that conflict. The same in the banking sector. If we would like, for example, to offer a loan, and we would like to offer a loan to in an equal way, then sometimes what will happen is that historically women would be earning less than men, and they may be granted less money. So the issue is that if we use data sets representing the world that it is now, we obviously incur an issue of unfairness. And that is because of the reality as it is now, because data is not neutral. Data represents society as it is now. There's nothing neutral about data, as there is nothing neutral about technology. So fairness is a choice. A company needs to make a clear choice, political, social choice, to change this and to say, I'm going to go against historic data, go against historic bias, go against inequality, and make a proactive choice. And this is where I think it's really important to remember that algorithmic fairness is very different from equality, and we mustn't confuse the two. And this is why technological fixes to algorithms are great, but in reality, this is very much of a political discussion that we need to have.
Thank you very much for your answer, and I think for the call to action for us, the politicians. And I would like to add under my headline, a sub-headline, data is neutral. I think this is a very important takeaway, especially as it is seen by many decision makers as a neutral thing, but it clearly isn't. So thank you very much for this important remark. Mr. De Stefano is our next speaker, and I would like to give you the floor directly for 10 minutes.
Many thanks, Chair. Many thanks for your introduction. Many thanks to the fellow speakers. We can jump to the next slide. I will just go straight to the point. I think we have already had many valuable insights from all the other speakers, so I'm not gonna spend too much time on that. Of course, the question of discrimination, which has been so well addressed by the last speaker. But what I want to bring to the fore is the idea that AI and algorithm-based management affect the whole panoply of managerial prerogatives. We should not think of this problem or this issue as confined to small parts of what employers and managers do and what happens in workplaces. In fact, this affects the whole panoply of managerial prerogatives, so direction, monitoring, surveillance, and discipline. Starting from hiring people, from promoting people through algorithmic management, and we know that there's problem of fairness and of potential discrimination there, but also going to the management of the day-by-day operation of the workforce, and the workforce is now tracked, directed, supervised by tools that also make use of artificial intelligence, and there's a lot of an heavy use of algorithms in how people are managed and are tracked, for instance, by wearable devices or by tools and software that monitors what remote workers do, for instance, what people that are connected to a computer are doing. So software that tracks how many keystrokes are given, how much time the worker is spending at the computer, but also, and this is where things get even more serious, the tracking of mental and emotional states, starting from the video camera in my computer that tracks where my eyes are looking and basically whether I'm focusing on the screen or I'm just looking somewhere else. We've seen how big problems the proctoring monitoring system for exams in universities created, and this is also spreading to our workplace. And in our workplaces, this is increasingly spurred by the heightened recourse to remote work due to the pandemic. From the moment managers were forced to leave people working from home because of the pandemic, there was a skyrocketing in recourse to a proctoring system that heavily monitor what people do and use proxies, as Ivana was saying before, that sometimes are completely unreliable to check who is productive or not, including by counting how many emails of a certain person are forwarded or not. And if many emails are forwarded, that means that this person is productive and brings good idea to the rest of the workforce and the company, and if not, that means that he or she is a slacker. Of course, that doesn't make any sense, but we should not think that these software are very sophisticated. In many cases, this is just a lot of junk that is being sold to companies, and particularly to small and medium enterprises that cannot afford to have their own software. And this software that is sold or leased to these companies can increase the risk that people are exposed to discrimination, are exposed to unfairness, and basically can also lead to big liabilities to these small and medium enterprises. So it's a problem of fairness for workers, and it's also a problem for small and medium enterprises. Also, and this is particularly important, emotional tracking and mental states tracking are enforced in workplaces by the uses of wearable devices that track your heartbeat, your tone of voice, record possibly the conversation you're having, and try to, on the basis of this data, anticipate what you're going to do and predict what you're going to do. So the big thing in AI is now also prediction of the behavior of people, and this is particularly dangerous for workers. When this is applied to workplaces, it means that basically managers and employers may be aware of the choices that people are going to make even before that the people itself are going to make. So it's particularly problematic and scary. And even if employers or managers are not interested in this, the platforms and the software provider may be. So it's not just a problem of the direct employer, but it's also a problem of how the data are shared between employers and the companies that install or manage these technologies. We can go to the other slide. As you see, it emerged from the previous presentation, I think this is not just a problem of privacy. It's not just a problem of data governance. Of course, this is extremely important, but we have issues when it comes to occupational health and safety, with increased stress and psychosocial risk of people that are constantly monitored by machines and feel always under the scrutiny of machines, that can really increase their psychosocial risk. And of course, the risk of discrimination, and Ivana was mentioning some of the decisions, including the decision from the Tribunal of Bologna that found that a platform was operating a system that was discriminatory in nature. So again, it's not just about privacy, it's about the whole set of fundamental labor rights that can be at stake when it comes to these forms of surveillance, monitoring, and management. This is why I think the privacy instruments should be read in conjunction with many other instruments that are out there to protect and safeguard workers' fundamental rights. We can go to the next slide. including, of course, beside of course the fundamental charter of the EU, also the Convention of Human Rights and that specific convention from the Council of Europe on data protection. Of course, Article 88 of the GDPR provides for the possibility to use collective bargaining to govern how data are used. But again, this is not just a matter of data governance, in my opinion. And this is also why I think it's now the time to try and connect the dots of the various initiatives that are present nowadays in various institutions. So at the EU level, but also at the OECD level and at the ILO level. At the OECD, something that I think is extremely important and for the moment very neglected is the work that they are doing on neurotechnology, including the question of brain data and how these affect employment at workplaces. We must be aware of the fact that some digital companies are after emotional and mental data, and we should intervene now. We should start thinking about what to do about that now, not in 3 or 5 years' time, because it's going to be too late. We can go to the last slide. Ivan and other speakers already mentioned that. I think that for the going forward, it's extremely important to involve the social partners in the negotiation of the technology that is introduced in workplaces and what kind of technology, what kind of algorithmic management or AI-enabled surveillance tools are introduced in workplaces should be part of information and consultation on the basis of the already existing EU regulation, but also enrich this regulation by extending this data, including by imposing a duty to bargain over the question of workers' data. And where collective bargaining doesn't reach, because we know that many employers, in particular SMEs, are outside the scope of sectoral collective bargaining in many countries. We need to have detailed legislation and regulation framework to govern these processes. We need to also start from the assumption that we can ban some of the most invasive technologies. It's not just about how we make them fairer. People should not have access to brain data of workers, full stop. This is something that we can ban as we have banned the polygraph in the past, and this is exactly the same principle of the polygraph that we decided to ban because it was too invasive. So in order to defend the singularity of human being, we have to defend the fact that no one can read their thoughts. And this is something that some digital platforms are after at the moment. And I stop here. Thank you very much, Chair.
No, thank you very much to sticking to the time. I know it's always complicated, so thank you very much. And I would just want to underline from a personal view that it is absolutely necessary that we make sure that it does not happen that companies get access to our thoughts, our brains. We know all that different companies are indeed doing research to connect AI and human brains. So this is not sci-fi, but this is happening, and this shouldn't happen. You're absolutely right, and the abuse of companies of the the emotional situation of users needs to be stopped too. I totally agree with that. But I will, of course, allow other panelists to come in here. And I can see that Stefan Olsen already raised his hand. So, or didn't he? Oh no, I think this was just, sorry, this was just an icon that maybe his connection isn't good. But Stefan, just to be sure, do you want to take the floor?
Mr. Olsen, could you please press the speak button?
No. Then I maybe misinterpreted the sign here. Sorry for the confusion. So as we have also questions from the community and not to end up very stressed in the end, I would now like to pass the floor to our last speaker, Ms. Dedden. The floor is yours.
Yes, thanks a lot, Chair. And I'm very pleased to participate in this webinar. I think it's a great opportunity and very timely, as many speakers have already said. So still good morning, honorable members, ladies and gentlemen. I would just like to introduce Uni Europa because you might not know our organization. We are European Services Workers Union, and we do represent many of the workers we're actually talking about today, which is why I'm here, because I would like to provide you with the kind of real view of the workers that are exposed to AI tools. And we represent people in the ICT sector, but also finance, commerce, etc., and also engineers that are actually developing AI systems. Next slide, please. So I would like to focus in my presentation merely on surveillance. I would like to raise our key concerns, and then I would like to just give you some of the examples of worker surveillance and also algorithmic management. And then I will look into the ethical AI issue and hopefully provide some ideas for solutions. Next slide, please. So basically, since the outbreak of the pandemic, and many speakers have mentioned it, we've seen a big increase of surveillance tool invading workers' homes. Now that is even a higher privacy concerns as people work remotely, I think. And I'm not dwelling on the different forms of surveillance. You've all mentioned them: algorithmic management, performance monitoring, navigation software, etc. I think what I really want to highlight here is that surveillance tools impact on workers' physical and mental health, and they have a dehumanizing effect sometimes. And there is a risk of unethical use of AI systems and the infringement of fundamental rights. And just as an example, we have our member Prospect, the union in the UK, who's done a survey just in January where it shows that 1 in 5 companies either use monitoring software already or are really preparing to do so. And also, I would like to mention something that has been already touched upon. It's the lack of transparency. So many workers just don't know what data the employer is collecting about them at work. 1 in 3 workers has basically no clue what data might be taken of her or of him. So this is a huge issue. Next slide, please. So just to give you some quick examples, we've mentioned wearables. In Amazon warehouses, we actually have wearables that are attached to a worker's arm that would guide them directly to the shelf so they can pull out the merchandise more efficiently. And it was mentioned before, and I'm happy it was mentioned, because it is used as an increase of efficiency for the company. But it's totally at the cost of workers' autonomy, because they are actually degraded to be merely a machine, basically. So they feel like a machine. There is a kind of discontact of the workforce about the way they have to work. And it's when we talk about dignity here, there is no such dignity, to be honest. And the same with contact centers. Teleperformance, one of the biggest call center companies, is using face biometrics to verify that it's the right person being at the computer as a call center agent. We've heard already about the voice analytics tools that are used in contact centers. So a worker would get real-time feedback whether he or she is speaking too fast, sounds too tired, etc. So you can imagine that this is not only very stressful, but also the machine basically dictates the feelings. Again, where is the ethical AI here, and where is the human dignity here? I don't see it. But what hasn't been mentioned yet, and I think this is when we talk about fundamental rights infringements and the right to organize and trade union rights, Amazon has a sophisticated but secret program that is surveying private Facebook groups set up by workers. We have colleagues, members of our unions that have reported about these issues happening, And so Amazon is basically monitoring labor organizing efforts. Next slide, please. So that leads us again to algorithmic management. Just to give some few examples, contact centers have been mentioned. Higher View is one of that AI-based tools that analyzes facial expressions, tone of voice, and accent. And again, this is used in recruitment processes. And again, talent screening software like Pharma is also used. These are systems that are using predictive people analytics and data mining techniques to make predictions about an employee's future behavior. And as was already mentioned, it does not necessarily mean that this is correct. So it's extremely biased and it is extremely untrustworthy. Next slide, please. I would also like to mention that 14% of UK organizations are already using machine learning and AI to develop people reports. So it's really on the increase. Now, what I would like to talk about now is the question, is ethical AI actually possible? We have already been talking for a long time about ethical AI. Lots of recommendations and guidelines have been put forward, but there is a critical gap between ethical principles and recommendations and the realities of the engineering practice, because we have engineers as our members that are extremely concerned about ethical AI, and they would like to see ethical AI really, but it is a very big challenge for what's happening at the moment in the engineering practice regarding training, regarding documentation. And what they claim is that we really need to define the responsibilities and the accountability. We need clear frameworks for how responsibility is distributed and accountability is performed in a company. And there should be a no-blame culture, because what happens in the worst-case scenario, it will be the individual software engineer that is blamed for something that has happened, something that has gone wrong. And this should not be the case. Again, engineers claim that they would really like to see a review of the engineer training so that you have humanities in engineering, that you would have more dialogue between professionals, civil society, and governance. I think we are all responsible for this. And if we talk about the data sets that are biased, that has to do also with a lack of diversity in the workforce, in those people designing AI. It's a lack of including the people that actually know about the AI and would actually be very, very helpful in providing ethical AI solutions. So this is where social dialogue comes in as well. And we need governance for responsible and ethical AI. So that means, and there I'm looking really to policymakers here, we need governmental oversight and sanctions for unethical decisions. We need compliance with GDPR, obviously, and also what has been mentioned before, ethical impact assessment prior to launching a system, because we don't want workers to be the guinea pigs of innovation. I think that is very, very important. And we need a clear commitment from the companies to want to obey to such a governance structure. So next slide, please. So I mentioned here solutions. It's a possible outlook. And what we would like to recommend is, first of all, social partners are key. We play a key role in negotiating the algorithm, and as was said, but the ethical approach to the design and the implementation of AI-driven surveillance tools, but AI-driven tools in general. What is really important is that there is a justification. Data collection or the surveillance of the workforce should be for a clearly justifiable purpose. Personal or other sensitive data should just not be collected, full stop, basically. And transparency was mentioned before. It is true, workers should really have a right to be made aware of any algorithmic management tools being used that might affect them and that are probably harmful to them. That leads me to something that was also mentioned before, which is the rights-based rather than the risk-based approach to regulation. I think that is something that I would like to echo also from Ivana's presentation, it's a political choice. It's not about technical feasibility necessarily. It's what we want, what society we are looking forward to. And that should be a society that is defending the rights of workers. And we need clear red lines for unethical AI systems that impact on fundamental rights, workers' rights and privacy. So obviously, last but not least, we are promoting the human in command approach, but we are all in consent here, I agree with you all on that. Algorithms should advise, but the humans should decide. So workers should always have the right to appeal to a human authorized to override the algorithm. I think this is really important, and this is my key message to whatever next step is happening regarding regulation. Please do involve the social partners. Next slide, please. So I'm stopping here. I would like to thank you very much for the attention. I would just like to point out to two papers we have published. The first one is the Uni-Europe position on AI, and the second one is a guide, a trade union guide to algorithmic management that has been elaborated by our professionals and managers groups. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much for your contributions. I think we can, or I can extend my sub headlines. So data isn't, data is impartial, so it's not neutral, and we shouldn't collect personal data. So this is, I think, a very important addition. So we have, of course, some questions from the audience. Unfortunately, translation ends in 5 minutes. So I will not waste time by my concluding remarks, but I suggest that I just raise the question from the audience and invite you to quickly react. Who really feels it's necessary to react to the question, please raise your hand so I can give you the floor once again so that we can finish. As always, it's difficult to keep the time plan. So the question from our audience is, are there any studies on work productivity while working under surveillance? Mental health issues are increasing due to the pandemic. Could surveillance make those problems worse? I think I take it from your interventions, from experience, that indeed surveillance can make those problems worse, and that productivity can suffer. But if someone wants to take the floor on this very important question, the time would be now. I suggest that Valerio starts first.
Yes, I am not aware of particular studies like with a big coverage on this. I know that EU OSHA is commissioning a study on the impact on psychosocial risks, and that, of course, we know also has an impact on productivity. In my opinion, we should not just focus on productivity, though. Even if productivity was improved in some cases, we should not have certain kind of surveillance. But I don't think there will be any study that shows that this increased level of surveillance in any way improves productivity.
Great. Thank you very much for this short and yet comprehensive answer. Does anyone else want to come in? Maybe as the last speaker. Yes, Birte, please.
Yes, I mean, I would agree with Mr. De Stefano here. We do not have any research providing for any kind of evidence on that, but I just think surveillance it's really stressful. I mean, you just have to imagine that it's not only about maybe raising the productivity and maybe you create stress, but it's a question of the quality of work really, and it comes down to that. It's really the problem that you do not feel that your work is valued, because it's a question of distrust as well, we have a quality issue here, but we have also a trust issue here. So if we talk a lot about trustworthy AI, do we actually trust our workers to do their job right? And can't they decide for themselves? So I think I would just like to throw that into the ring, rather. Thanks.
And this is indeed the right question, I think. So you need to trust people if you want to have a trust with the AI in the end. So thank you very much. I would like to thank all participants for being here today, all panelists for their introductions, their remarks, their ideas, their thoughts. We will digest it and hopefully come up with precise and good legislation. So as I said, translation ends now. I would like to thank the interpreters for their enormous work as always. And I will skip my closing remarks, just the promise that we will keep your interventions in mind when it comes to legislation. And I'm now honored to pass the floor without any further ado to my colleague from Italy, Brando Benefe, for the closing remarks. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you, Timo, and let me thank also Iban that is here with us, our coordinator. I would like to thank myself also, all the extremely competent speakers discussing with us in this very fruitful morning. And I would like to thank FEPS for their contribution in organizing this webinar together with our S&D Group Secretariat. The presentations and the debate showed how the uptake of AI can constitute, of course, an opportunity, but it carries also great challenges that, if not properly governed, can enormously impact workers' rights, as they do already. With a technology that favors collusion and concentration of power in a few hands, AI can create a whole new layer of social conflict and inequalities, as we saw clearly today. This is why we need more than ever for progressive stakeholders to organize, mobilize, form a clear position with clear red lines, fighting together at all levels, from academia and think tanks to institutions, social partners and workplaces. We have shown in the past years that our ideas can become reality if we work all together, although it's still an ongoing fight. Social pillar, youth guarantee, now the child guarantee, our work on digital rights such as the right to disconnect, or the working status and conditions of platform workers, are just examples of this ongoing fight that the pandemic has made even more relevant and urgent. The EP report on ethical aspects of artificial intelligence, with the work led by Iban, was another cornerstone in setting our position on AI and fundamental rights that are a key component of what we discussed today. And the Porto Summit will also play a fundamental role in this agenda-shaping exercise. The messages are clear. AI must support workers, relieve them from repetitive or heavy tasks, improving their performance and productivity, leaving more room for their well-being and personal growth. It must respect workers' privacy, human dignity, non-discrimination, and fundamental rights at all stages, from the recruiting process to the day-to-day job, including the right to organize, protect their health and safety, ensure a decent wage and working conditions. We need to fight for the quality of jobs, which is at stake. The main issue underlying all these aspects is the power imbalance. In the case of platform workers, we are proposing that the employee should not carry the burden of the proof to prove the employment relationship, precisely to partially counter this imbalance in bargaining power. There is a big debate going on this, and AI is intertwined. Moreover, as we saw today, workers currently do not fully know what data is collected about them or how it is processed and stored. Nor are they fully aware that they are monitored by AI systems. We saw how the pandemic even worsened these aspects, with teleworking devices that sometimes can be extremely invasive. We must make sure that employees are fully informed when there is an AI system involved in their work, that they know what data are collected about them, and we must make sure they give consent to such processing and can eventually object to abusive practices. At the same time, algorithms or biometric recognition devices can influence hiring decisions or predict workers' future performance based on personal characteristics. These decisions are extremely prone to bias and discrimination and should be banned. And impacted workers should have the right to appeal against harmful decisions in this sense. I think that this example shows very clearly how we can put in practice our principles on the AI. It makes total sense, as it has been said, to call for a rights-based AI legislative framework instead of a binary risk-based approach. We have seen how simplistic this low-risk, high-risk system of categorization can be, and in any case, employment-related systems should always be considered as a high risk with strict liability. The EP report on ethical aspects of artificial intelligence confirms this vision, and we strongly call on the Commission to take that into account. Therefore, as the presentation showed, there is great scope for the role of social dialogue. Empowering social partners and involving employees in the process is key. But I recall also what we heard today about the importance of the auditing of algorithms impacting workers. I will add on the table the issue of strong ethics training for engineers designing AI systems and algorithms. I insist on this because it might sound as an understood point, but there is still much more room for improvement and understanding in this sense. I believe today we managed to delve even more into the multifaceted implications that the uptake of AI can have in all aspects related to employment. I thank you, as these contributions will be particularly valuable for our work within the AIDA committee, in which I am the shadow rapporteur for the Socialists and Democrats group, as well as, of course, for the other standing committees working on AI. Again, we know that it will be up to us to bring all these issues on the table when negotiating the Parliament's position on AI, on the proposal that will come in April. It was important to have Commission representatives today to discuss with us, and their words were very important in this sense. We know that we will face counter-arguments, defending business interest as the main topic, competitiveness, innovation. But we don't want to exclude that, obviously. But innovation cannot come at the cost of exclusion. And regulating AI, establishing EU ethical standards, will not necessarily stifle innovation. To the contrary, as it has been said, if well designed, it will eliminate bad innovation and can even contribute to better innovation in terms also of increasing productivity, creating a level playing field, and incentivizing frameworks for individuals to work better in a better work environment. So thank you all again for this enriching discussion. And let us continue our common work for an AI that truly serves society and people and workers, and not the opposite. Thank you.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Brando. In fact, I don't have much more to add to this statement. I think it's a very good wrap-up of the whole meeting. Sorry? Thank you. Sorry. I misleaded the microphone. Sorry. As I was saying, I think it was a nice meeting today. I think it was so profitable even for us, even for regulators, mainly for us, for regulators. So thank you so much to all interveners. Thank you so much to all participants. Thank you so much to be looking after this kind of situations, this kind of issues that are so important, quite important for our societies, and is at the end, at last, is the main part of our political project as social and democrats in Europe. So we'll keep striving to have this in the principal, in the main agenda of European policies. We push forward to the Commission to have to keep this just as a principal issue in their proposal that is going to be at the beginning of April, as Lucilla Scholli said just today. We have in this regard we have a new knowledge about this topic that is so profitable for us. And just to finish, we are confident. We are confident against all odds. We are confident that we could be able to combine the development of this kind of technologies and the respect for the social and worker rights. This is our duty, this is our commitment, and we'll keep striving for it. Thank you very much. Thank you to all, and we'll keep and continue working on this. So we'll see each other so soon. Thank you very much.